we can start. So I'm looking to see if there's Alfonso. Welcome.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you great.
Yep.
And
Yes.
Amy, I'm going to let you kick it off.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to our March meeting of the Climate and Clean Energy Working Group. And we all made it through the session, and we are so delighted to have two of the hardest warriors out there, Rip Sullivan and Alfonso Lopez, joining us. We have a lot of new faces joining us tonight. So welcome if this is the first time you're joining us. And thanks for participating. We won't go into a lot of background about who we are and what we're about. We're going to assume that you're sort of aware of that, but happy to catch up with anybody later who might have questions. I don't want to take too much time opening this up because we have such a great opportunity to talk to the two delegates tonight, but I want to just give a huge shout out to all of our members who responded to our calls to action. This year, we surpassed our greatest goals. With you all, we sent over 82,000, almost 83,000 emails to the members in the General Assembly about our priority bills and then some additional bills. And I have to say that half of those went after crossover, so just in the last month. And that is just really fantastic. The winner in terms of the number of emails that were sent were around the Reggie budget items, including keeping Virginia and Reggie in the budget. That garnered over 17,000 votes. But it was very closely followed by emails for solar and for the SAVE Act. So we just really are so thankful for the participation of all of you who are on the call and those of you who aren't. And with that, I don't want to take up any more time, so I'm going to hand it over to Sharon, who's going to really manage the panel tonight.
Thank you, Amy, but I think I'm going to hand it to Monique first, who's going to do introductions.
Sure. Without further ado, we're thrilled to have our panel this evening. Delegate Rip Sullivan represents Virginia's 6th District in Fairfax and has served in the House of Delegates since 2014. He's been a true champion for clean energy and patroned many bills supported by our working group over the years, and especially this year. He helped us kick off this General Assembly session at the beginning with our first meeting, and we're really looking forward to hearing his take on how it all panned out. We're also thrilled to have Delegate Alfonso Lopez representing the 3rd District, that's portions of Arlington and Alexandria. He has served as a delegate since 2012, and he's a lifelong environmentalist, a huge supporter of clean energy. He founded the bipartisan Virginia Environment and Renewable Energy Caucus in the General Session and has supported numerous efficiency, clean energy, and environmental bills. So we're really glad to have him with us to help assess the outcomes of this year's session. Sharon's going to moderate our panel, so over to you, Sharon.
Okay, thank you so much, Monique. For starters, if you all have questions, just please put them in the chat or raise your hand at the end of our time together. We'll have a little bit of time for question and answer. So that will be great. And Amy, if you can kind of make sure we're pinned so that folks show, that would be awesome. I just want to give a little bit of a background before we start with questions and answers to our wonderful panelists tonight. Long before the session, the broader environmental coalition, which includes groups like Sierra Club, Southern Environmental Law Center of Virginia, League of Conservation Voters, many groups, including our own, and solar industry partners, understood that ambitious bills, even if they were passed out of the General Assembly, would likely be vetoed by Governor Youngkin. So very early on, we focused on bills that we thought would make small but important incremental changes to existing law like the Virginia Clean Economy Act. And because they were so narrowly crafted, we thought that at least some would escape the veto pen of the governor. However, we had a panel last month, right at Crossover, that was composed of Connor Kish, who, if you didn't see the panel, he's the executive director of Sierra Club, Blair St. Ledger Olson, who is now with Virginia League of Conservation Voters, and Josephus Allman from the Southern Environmental Law Center. And at Crossover, things weren't going so great. So we're going to update from there. And before we talk about some of the things that didn't quite go as well as we'd like, I'd really like to focus on some of the successes we had. We got Reggie, the General Assembly got Reggie back in the budget. We don't know what the governor will do with it, but it's back in the budget, which is exciting. The SAVE Act, which will require utilities to provide at least more energy efficiency eventually through time, was a bipartisan bill that got passed. And I think one of the bills we're the most excited about is a bill that was patroned by RIP in the House, and I think by Scott Sullivan and Senator Zuderlein in the Senate. It's a bipartisan bill that would really be doing a study on utilities, and it's really called the Performance-Based Regulations Bill. And we're excited about this bill. And Rip, I was hoping you could start us off with what we think is a really good success. Perhaps remind us what this bill is going to accomplish and why it's so critically important.
Sure. Thanks, Sharon. Happy to. And by the way, Sharon, your sound is a little sketchy, but I'm not sure there's anything you can do about it. Before I say anything, a couple things. One, I want to echo the comments early on about the hard work you folks have put in, hard work you put in during session, all the emails you sent. I just want you to know that at the risk of sounding like what's her name from Alabama, we hear you. You know, I know there's some disappointments this session you want to talk about, but it works. It helps. It keeps conversations in Richmond going. People coming up to me and Alfonso asking about, you know, gee, I heard about this bill. I got a bunch of emails about it. What's it all about? So it's really a huge part of the mix, both political and educational. And I'm just really, and I know Alfonso is too, grateful for the hard work you folks do helping us push these issues. I think the narrative here is right. We had some bumps, and we had some successes. Anyone on this call who knows me knows I'm a sort of a congenitally glass half full kind of guy. And my view, I won't speak for Alfonso, but I think and hope he feels this way, is that all things considered in context, we had some really important wins in this session, which is not to diminish our disappointments, but I prefer to focus more on the wins. The bill you're asking about, Sharon, I agree with you, is one of the sort of unheralded bills of this session that is a resolution, so it does not even go to the governor. So we don't have to worry about a gubernatorial veto. And you were right. Scott had it in the Senate with Suderline. I reprised a partnership I've had in the past with Lee Ware. I carried the bill. Lee, who's a Republican, pretty senior Republican representing from Powhatan, co-patroned it. Alfonso was on it. You know, all the folks you'd expect to be on it were on it. And it directs the SCC and the Department of Energy to spend the next year and a half taking a look at performance-based regulations. I affectionately called it the PBR bill, which when I was a kid drinking more beer than I do now, PBR meant something different. There's going to be a stakeholder group, we love to call them, taking a look at what other states are doing in this field. It's not, one of the ways I pitched it is that it's really not a radical concept. A lot of states are doing this, and it's sort of beautiful in its simplicity, in that it with a few, relatively small tweaks in how utilities are compensated, we can change the entire incentive structure, which, as we all know right now, sort of revolves, Dominion and APCO get paid when they build stuff and get paid particularly well when they build expensive stuff, and when they sell lots of electrons, lots of electricity. And there are ways and incentives we can put into either our code or our regulations, where they can get paid. No one's looking to put Dominion and APCO out of business, but they can get paid for doing different things, like building things more efficiently, building things less expensively, and more importantly, from my perspective, actually get paid for selling less electricity, meaning work much harder on, you mentioned the SAVE Act, energy efficiency. We'll probably talk about the data center bill that I had in, reward Dominion for working hard to improve Virginia's energy efficiency, so that even though they're selling fewer electrons, they're still making money for their investors. And it's, we're going to come out of this process at the end of 2025. And what'll be interesting about that is it'll be on the eve of a new governor. And I'm hoping that governor has a D after his or her name, and that we still have a majority, and that when we get this report, which I expect, I have every reason to expect will be positive in terms of the potential in implementing some PBR regulations, that we'll be in a position to go ahead and pass them. That sounds a long way away. We're talking about the 2026 session. But Alfonso and I can both tell you that that's a lot closer than we think in legislative years. And having what I liked about the strategy, what I liked about the bill, is if we had come to the General Assembly, this one, or even next year's General Assembly, and gone straight to the end, which is to say, here's a bill, with having to do with performance-based regulation. There wouldn't have been enough groundwork laid. And this is the kind of thing that, while I described it as relatively simple, nevertheless will be significant. And having the groundwork laid of a study done by DOE and the SEC with a broad range of stakeholders, I think will give us the absolute best chance of success when we get to the 2026 session. Didn't get a lot of publicity. I'm not sure I even saw any news article about it. But as far as I was concerned, that was a good thing. Sometimes you want to stay below the radar. I don't issue as many press releases as some of my colleagues, and that's purposeful. Sometimes if you can just get a bill with some momentum and not attract too much attention to it, you can get it through. And this one actually got through with little or no opposition. So I think that's one of our big successes of this session. I'm happy to answer questions about. I'll just give him I don't know what you have next in mind, Sharon, but it might be nice to bookend this conversation. Alfonso was the chief patron in the House of frankly, the other bill that I think is the sort of unheralded, little noticed, successful piece of legislation having to do with setting up a green bank, and which has all sorts of ramifications for the future. So, Alfonso?
Sharon, is that all right to piggyback on that?
Absolutely.
So I want to just echo what Rip said. Thank you all very, very much for being so very active this session. I would actually have people quote your notes and emails to me, other members, and so I was incredibly helpful. And as the old adage goes, for every email that you receive from someone in your district, that people assume it's another 10 people feel the same way. Every phone call you get, it's another 100 people. Every handwritten letter, it's 500 people. And every meeting, it's 1,000 people. So keep the emails and phone calls and letters coming. We really do appreciate it. And I also appreciate you supporting us, because the only reason we know and the only reason we fight so hard is because we know there are people like you behind us who supporting these important policies for renewable energy in the environment. So yeah, the Green Infrastructure Bank fund was created this year, and it is going to be amazing if the governor passes or signs it. Basically, what the bill will do is it will enable us to tap into around $219 billion worth of federal money and tax incentive and tax credits. And so what you're able to do here is just for Virginia, we believe this will get us around $371 million in federal grants, as well as tax credits and loans. But the most important thing is that when you're doing energy efficiency projects, when you're doing energy efficiency or renewable energy technology, when you're doing these projects, sometimes you are missing that delta, you're missing that funding section that you can't get to. The Green Bank in Virginia, as the rest of the green banks are being set up around the country, or that are now being set up, or that are already in existence, provide some of that extra money, that bridge money to get projects created and developed and invested in. The one thing I'm also going to say is that because you can use the full faith and credit of not just the developer, but the U.S. Department of Energy for this money, in many cases, based on the tax credits, projects that would be half as much. So solar on schools will cost half as much as they would currently. And these are, I think, a real important way that we can actually be investing in and providing support for a lot of the folks who want to come and do renewable energy projects in the state. So not just, solar, but wind off the coast, hydrokinetic, and so we had some kerfuffles with this, with appropriations on the House side. We were able to finally get it done with $10 million in the conference report budget that we are working with the governor's office and the Department of Energy, former Delegate Glenn Davis, to make sure we maintain and hopefully increased around $25–30 million. And it came down to really negotiations about the board and their background in finance, and then also who got to appoint them. And so at the end of the day, it was the bill we passed was 4 House appointees, 4 from the governor, 4 from the Senate. Originally, the governor wanted all of the appointees, and he keeps forgetting we're a co-equal branch. And so we're able to address that, but we really do need to work with the governor closely to make sure that this gets done, because all of this money will go away after 2026. And so we need to be able to have this in place now. And so that's why it was so vitally important we get it accomplished this session.
Thank you, Alfonso. That is such an excellent bill. And please keep us posted if there's anything we can do to help make sure we get that money in the right place by 2026, spent by 2026. So thank you very much for that bill. I'm going to segue a little bit to some of the disappointments before we talk about strategies for next year. There were some real disappointments. I'm going to start with you, Rip. You went forward carrying several bills, and I think, Alfonso, you were co-patron on a number of these bills, but that included the Solar Interconnection Bill. It was one of our priorities. The Affordable, Reliable, and Competitive Act, another one of our priority bills. And of course, the Data Center Bill, which would have linked the lucrative tax incentives to actually requiring data centers to procure a certain amount of renewable energy and attain a certain level of energy efficiency. These bills got killed, and they were defeated in a democratically controlled legislature. Talk to us about this. What do you think were the biggest factors in resulting in the death of these very needful and very good bills? So I'm going to ask them both this question, Rip. I'm going to start with you.
So let me work backwards. I was really I was excited about all these bills, but The answer to your question is that there's a story for each one. That there's no one thing that's going to explain all of those situations. Every bill's got its own idiosyncrasies and nooks and crannies. The data center bill, which I was probably of the three the most optimistic that we could get through, ran into an unusual set of circumstances. As y'all know, there were, I don't know about dozens, but lots of data center bills. Data centers were at the eye of the storm in many respects this session. I pitched this bill as being one that did not get into the whole issue of should we have data centers? If so, how many? Where should they go? All of those sorts of particularly local types questions and all the stuff that's brewing out in Prince William. This was pitched as simply, well, if we're going to have data centers, let's make them as efficient as possible, and let's do away with diesel backup generators. One of the things that the thing that killed the bill, and it didn't kill the bill, it just delayed the bill, is that JLARC is currently doing a big study on data centers. And the minute someone mentions JLARC, particularly an ongoing JLARC study, it becomes very easy, and in some ways it makes sense to have JLARC look at the issue before we legislate on. And so there is an ongoing JLARC study about any and all issues having to do with data centers. And while the bill didn't get through this year, by next year we'll have this JLARC study in hand. One of the things that's going to happen is that the chair of the relevant committee, in this case the finance committee, is going to write a letter to JLARC and say, hey, make sure you think about this issue that was raised in House Bill, whatever it was. And we'll get a chance to have them weigh in, and I assume sort of positively. The first thing I learned when I got to Richmond is that even the best ideas can take a little while to marinate down there. I look at energy efficiency. That for me, that's taken 10 years to get people to really be focused on it. But when you think about it, this data center bill, this was sort of the first year we brought it. And so I'm not diminishing the disappointment with it's not passing, but I haven't given up. And I think with a JLARC study in hand next year, I feel good about I'll be coming back with it for sure next year. I can promise you that. The interconnection bill sort of founded on the shoal of some very tough negotiations with Dominion. And big, huge disagreements about costs and who was responsible for what. I mean, I cannot tell you how many hours I spent closeted in a room with our advocates. I'm sure Connor can tell you, trying to negotiate that bill, and the same with ARC, which, from our perspective, represented an incremental change. You won't be surprised to learn from Dominion's perspective that they thought it represented a dramatic change.
Rick,
that leads to
JLARC is.
Say again?
Explain what JLARC is.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's the Joint Legislative and Review Commission. It's nonpartisan. It has great credibility in Richmond. It is a place, a group that studies a lot of the sort of thornier issues that we're dealing with. Data centers certainly tops that list these days. When they take a look at an issue report, it has a lot of gravitas in the General Assembly. I will tell you that one theme that I think this group ought to recognize, and I think Alfonso will agree with, is that Dominion really flexed this session. They got punched in the nose last session, frankly, by both sides, meaning both sides of the General Assembly and even the governor. with, they pitched the bill we passed last year as good for them, but it was really not anything like what they wanted. And they got pushed around a little last year, and they came back this year, really flexing their muscle. And no one on this call should be under any illusions that Dominion is
Dead.
They remain a powerful force within the General Assembly on both sides of the aisle, and they took some pretty strong stands, particularly on the two bills you mentioned, and we just weren't able to cobble together the votes. Let me I'm not dodging your question, Sharon, but before I forget, because there's so much for us to talk about. The two SCC judges, huge victory for us, and a long-term victory. By that I mean both took us a while to get there. They were one of the hidden gems of our victory last November, that it gave us the chance to choose both of those SCC commissioners rather than just one of them. And of course, that commission's going to be that commission now for a long time.
You had told me 10 years ago that we'd have all three of the SCC judges were, basically pro moving the ball forward in terms of climate and environment and renewable energy. I would have told you were crazy.
Yeah.
So
And thank you for raising that, because we don't weigh in on those issues so much. We can weigh in on bills and that sort of thing. But thank you for reminding us how important the SCC will be.
Huge victory. Huge and great choices. Both of the new judges are terrific.
To describe it to someone who doesn't know what it is, it's the great Oz behind the curtain.
Or the other way to think of it, if you stop 100 people on the streets and ask them what the SEC is, none of them will know. But it is almost a fourth branch of government, and it's just enormously important and impactful on all of the issues that everyone on this call is interested in. And I will tell you, I'll just say the other side, folks who tend to be resistant to the types of things that Alfonso and I and others push down there. The only bad part of having now gotten all three SCC commissioners is that the other side, whenever we wanted to do something that it would direct the SCC to do something, the line, at least I got back pretty regularly, was, well, wait a minute, you guys have been pushing for the last umpteen years to give the SCC more discretion to do stuff. So now why don't you let them do what you asked them to do? And that's not a terrible point, frankly. So I do have more confidence that the SCC is going to do a lot of things as it exercises its discretion that the SCC of 3 years ago would not have.
Those answers. So Alfonso, I'm going to pivot to you. We've heard Dominion is a big reason. We've heard that the JLARC study for data centers is a reason. I do note that I think that JLARC study wasn't ordered until December 2023, right before session. Is that correct, Rip?
Yeah, I think it was. It wasn't a dodge. I don't want to, but it was clear that data centers is out there being it's a huge issue, and I think it was a late breaking study assigned to JLARC, and I think there was a sense that having JLARC look at it before we took dramatic action. I'm not suggesting ours was particularly dramatic, but there are lots of other things going on with respect to data centers. That I think the thought was, well, let's have JLARC look at it. I mean, everyone on this call who's spent any time lobbying the General Assembly knows that the minute someone mentions the word "let's study it," you're backpedaling a little bit, because it makes it easier for a legislator to dodge an issue.
Alfonso, what would you like to add? What other were factors that led to, some of these bills not crossing the finish line? in addition to Dominion, which we know is huge.
Democrats are a big tent.
You want to say more?
Not every delegate represents Arlington and Alexandria. Not every delegate represents a place that is very forward thinking on things like climate and renewable energy and the environment. And I'd rather have a Democratic majority where I win 50% of the time or 60% of the time or 75% of the time than getting everything I want all the time. Now, was I very disappointed with some bills that got out or didn't get out? Yeah. Was I very disappointed that some bills like SMRs got passed, even though they were watered down? Yeah. But would I rather have Democrats making these decisions? Yeah. For me, the argument isn't as simple as Dominion flex their muscles, or we have somebody got to somebody or something like that. That's not how this works. And Rip said it perfectly when he said that every single bill had its own soap opera behind it and its own story. And so you can't sort of boil it all down to one thing. So yeah, I wish I could give you an answer that was, pithy and quick, but it's not as simple as that.
So we asked this question, really will segue into strategy. So for example, last month, our panel with Connor et al. Suggested that we had not done enough outreach. The environmental committee had not done enough outreach with labor. Labor supported some of these bills, particularly data centers and the nuclear bills. And we might want to consider spending more time working with labor over the next, before the next session, to see if we can not be in opposition. That was one of the factors that we've heard. I'd love to hear comments on that. I also heard that, the environmental community, while we parsed bills and made them small, there were just too many. So it made messaging maybe difficult. Maybe, wasn't like the days when we had just the VCEA or Reggie, where, all the groups were supporting one bill. We heard that as potentially part of what may have led to some of the failures. So we just want to talk about this here. You guys talk about this more, because
let me go backwards on that a little bit, Sharon.
Yeah.
Anybody who tells you didn't put enough you put in too many bills, it's like somebody telling Mozart that he had too many notes in his symphony, right? That's why they didn't like it. They're idiots. All right. And so the fact is that we want more environmental bills. We want more bills that are addressing pressing issues. And don't believe somebody when they say, oh, well, we don't want to be talking about a lot of this stuff. Well, the years we had, the years when we were the majority 4 years back, and we dealt with considerably more environmental pieces of legislation, including Reggie, including the VCEA, than we did this year. And so because we were sort of had this bottleneck of 25 years of legislation that had never been done. So, that's not the answer. I think, my opinion, I think you need, if there's an issue, you got to address it, right away. With regard to labor, I come from a labor family. I'm one of the strongest supporters of the labor community in the General Assembly. I put my bona fides up against anybody. I'm the chair of the Labor and Commerce Subcommittee 2, dealing with labor and workforce issues. And I will tell you, yes, labor and the environmental community need to be working hand in glove on things. And when they're not, there's an issue. And so I definitely agree that outreach to the labor community is vitally important. But just like with the environmental community, where you have, dozens of groups all coming at environmental or renewable energy issues from their own unique perspective. There are labor groups coming at things from their own unique perspective. And so the problem here is that if you get one labor group to say, oh, we want something, then everyone thinks, oh, labor's behind something. Well, in fact, that's not the case. But what a lot of the larger labor groups want are just large scale projects that they can get jobs on. And even when those projects might not happen for 30 years or 10 years or 5 years, they're still going to say, oh, we want that project. And so there's much more to that dynamic with the labor unions than meets the eye sometimes. And so it's important, it's vitally important that we talk to labor about large infrastructure projects early in the process and make them partners in everything we're doing, every step of the way. Because if you don't, you might get sideswiped.
Yeah, let me just follow up on Alfonso's first point there about our Big Ten. We won the election, and thank God, and that got us 51 votes. But 51 votes is one vote short on every bill of coming up short on a vote, and that's true in committee as well. The committees are so tight that you lose one vote, a bill can't get through. And we are a big tent. Every member's got their own issues. Let's not forget that 4 years ago the VCA almost died at the hand of Democrats.
Yep. And I got to tell you, I was there.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Me too, dude.
Jousting battles with the Democrats who were trying to kill the VCA because it wasn't pure enough. Right. And their idea of pure was going to get, as opposed to going from the second worst state in America for climate reduction and mitigation to the fourth best in 18 months, they were upset that it wasn't the Green New Deal.
Yeah,
and so that's
I unearthed these bad memories, which give both Alfonso and me nightmares or flashbacks. Just to say, there are a lot of oh, hi Blair. There are a lot of moving parts of trying to put together 51 votes on the floor, or 6 votes in a subcommittee, or even less than that, 4 votes in a subcommittee. Interconnection was a disappointment. ARC was a disappointment. Not so much so that I think that we ought to give up. Frankly, we made a lot of progress. We were very close. I think particularly on ARC, and I've got some ideas about how to reconfigure our strategy and go back next year. It's just not unusual to have to take a couple years to get even a good idea through. Another bill which we haven't talked about.
Let me just throw this out there, Rip. It takes 6 years.
Yeah.
The old adage back in the day was, because of the nature of how our Jefferson manual works and how the Mason manual works under that and how our procedures work, any good idea takes 6 years to marinate and then eventually become the law of the common. That's back from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. That's what people used to say. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So there were a couple of other successes, I think, Sharon. I know Dennis asked about the rural EV bill. That was it might even be my biggest disappointment of the session, because that is one that I've tried 3 times before. That is one, no, excuse me, 2 times before. So here I was on the 3rd try. This was one which we finally got out of both chambers. I think Dennis asked about what happened in conference. The problem with the rural EV bill was that it was in the House budget, but it wasn't in the Senate budget. And the only difference between the 2 bills was that we had money, $2 million in the House budget. The Senate had $0. And the Senate, in the broader budget negotiation, did not move on the on the rural EV bill. But we had a majority that thinks it's a good idea, including, by the way, a bunch of Republicans. But it got sort of caught in the budget switches, which makes it kind of doubly frustrating. But in my glass half full view of the world, we got further than we ever have, and I will I'll be working hard to find that money in this off season so we can get this in the next year's caboose bill.
Sharon, but just to piggyback on something Rip said, there's a lot of good that got passed. I mean, 8 of my 29 bills, the ones that got passed, 8 of them were climate or environment bills. So we got, for the first time in 12 years, after we had all those studies done after the Elk River disaster, we finally have a above ground chemical storage tank legislation to address that environmental risk, so we don't have an Elk River type situation. Well, the Forest Sustainability Act got done. The building code bill, I got that unanimous out of the Senate, which is insane because it was basically calling out the governor for trying to get rid of all the energy efficiency standards in the building code of Virginia. The LEAF bill got done, which is allowing localities to set up environmental funds to give people environmentally more friendly leaf blowers or HVAC units or mobility systems. And also, guys, we finally got the flood mitigation bill done and the resiliency bill done. I mean, you've got parts of Virginia that are like, just like we have snow days, they have flood days for schools. All right. It's the second most vulnerable part of the country besides New Orleans to flooding, in Virginia Beach and Hampton Roads. And so we finally got all of those recommendations put into legislation and passed. Were there some issues? Yes, but we got stuff like the historic rehabilitation tax credit increase done, which is helping revitalize all of our inner city communities. And then also we got all the battlefield preservation in the budget, over I think $10 million, which is a win-win-win-win-win. It's good for clean air, safe drinking water, clean water, tourism, economic development, and history. And also, gosh, land conservation. So, I mean, there are all these victories we've had this year because we had a majority, on top of things like the Green Bank and some other major pieces of legislation.
Got shared solar done.
EV charging.
I'm worried about the slow pace of permitting and such. So we got a DEQ bill through that will speed up the pace of any litigation relating to permits. The one bill that made a splash and never was never intended to actually get through this year, but I wanted to start a conversation about it, is the whole issue of siting and what do we do about localities that are starting to shut their borders to solar. I think that's an important conversation which we need to have. And I may lead my newsletters at the end of session with a tree bill, because who can get tree bills through? We finally got some great tree legislation, tree canopy stuff. That's at least in Planning District 8. We did some stuff that's statewide, and in Planning District 8, we're going to be able to incentivize builders to stop clear cutting lots and preserving trees. So
Planning District 8 is Northern Virginia.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Northern Virginia. So I guess I'm not trying to dodge your questions about the stuff that didn't get passed, because I'm as disappointed as I know Alfonso is and everyone on this call. But I don't think we ought to take our eye off the ball. Winning that election, getting 51 votes. There are dozens of bills that are headed to the governor's desk right now that never would have been headed there. That are going to do good things for the environment.
And a bunch of incredibly bad bills that never saw the light of day.
Yeah.
And I know because I was the chair of Ag and Natural Resources at Chesapeake Bay, and he was the chair of Energy Sub. So
that's all. very helpful. I'm gonna take myself off video because for some reason, everybody that knows me, my house has gremlins and my internet seems to go in and out.
You should get that checked. The gremlin.
Yeah, we'd love to get rid of the gremlins. I think that we don't disagree. There's been great stuff that did happen. Our group focuses more on the specific climate and clean energy legislation.
Sharon,
Yes.
Sharon, you need to turn your video off.
Oh, yes, here we go. Sorry. Our group tends to focus more on the climate and clean energy legislation, so we haven't necessarily held up some of these other environmental laws. So I'm really appreciative of you guys for reminding us of this. But I will say that there is a undercurrent of concern in the broader environmental community, or when I say beyond my working group, about the role of Dominion in affecting bills. And we often wonder, can we be very successful in getting bills through without maybe some campaign finance reform with respect to regulated monopolies? I know Nancy Morgan's on this call. She's been working on campaign finance for quite a few years now.
Oh, I see Keith. I know Keith's doing it. Yeah, look,
Keith
look,
too.
I'm not telling you not to be worried about Dominion. In fact,
Yeah.
I think I was the guy who said Dominion flexed this session. Yeah, no, they're they're a problem. They're a problem. And they're not going away. So
I think the question sort of becomes, what do we do for next year? How do we get these bills passed Dominion? I think that, a couple of these bills are bipartisan. Is that going to be the way to go? Are we going to be able to find partners like we did on SAVE and performance-based regulations? Is that a way to sort of get around the issue? We'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this, because we have to figure out how we're going to work next year. So, we rely on you guys to help guide us.
Well, the last thing in the world I want to end this call with, I really don't want, maybe I'm, I don't know. I don't want to get stuck on just words, but
yeah,
it's okay to be. I'm fine with everyone being disappointed, but I want, let's not feel defeated here, right? It's, I think what Alfonso and I are getting at. There's no reason for us to believe that we cannot and should not keep working on everything we've been doing. I saw the comments in the chat about time being of the essence, and boy, do Alfonso and I both know that, right? Waiting to do this stuff in the energy space, particularly when we're talking about climate issues, when you have to say things like, let's wait till next year, is particularly distressing, because we just don't have time to let these things marinate too long. But having said that, let's not turn the loss of these bills into any kind of, I don't want anyone to give up, for goodness sakes. We got close on a couple of these bills. I can tell you from being in those rooms that we were close on who was going to vote how. We were close on whether we had language that would work for a much broader group of members. So, I don't want anyone to come away from this session thinking that there's nothing we can do. And we just need to redouble our efforts. We don't have an election between now and then. Our number's going to be exactly the same next year.
So along those lines, I mean, I'll tell you exactly what you can do. We didn't know who was going to be on various committees before it happened. True. And now you have an entire year to reach out to a lot of these folks who are actually freshmen on fairly senior committees because of the nature of our caucus. I mean, we had a caucus of 51 people, 20 of whom were brand new. 20 out of 51 in our caucus. And so several of them who were not expected to be on commerce or the energy sub, or in fairly senior positions in other committees, where they sit now. Where they are, and who to target for robust conversations about your perspective on any issue. So you have a year now to sort of have these discussions, and it's always best to have partners, not just from the organization, but specifically from their districts, and folks that they trust, standing with you when you deliver these messages.
That's a great recommendation. I really appreciate tangible recommendation. And along those lines, I'm going to just ask one more kind of related question. Then I'd like to have people have the opportunity to ask you guys questions. How do we better engage maybe leadership on these bills? How do we get their attention? These bills are important to this community and really to the whole state. Is there a way that we should be engaging with leadership?
The answer to that is yes. Leadership, all leaders in the caucus, whether you're talking about committee chairs or you're talking about elected leaders, starting with the speaker, they need to hear. All of us need, all 51 of us need to constantly be reminded that the environmental community writ large, whatever that means, is a vital, crucial part of our democratic coalition. They need to be reminded of that. And as Alfonso pointed out earlier, there's always lots of push-pull. Labor wants us to do one thing. We have a lot of constituencies. We are a big tent. But we should be flexing our muscles as well, which is to be in touch with them, to be persuading them, hitting them with emails and letters, meetings, letting them know that environmentalists helped get us elected and want to see results. That is absolutely something we need to keep doing.
Thank you so much. I think in order to allow some time, I'm going to stop asking questions. And Monique, do you want to kind of moderate questions?
Sure. Most of the questions actually have been covered, and I applaud our panelists for kind of keeping an eye on the chat. One question is about the JLARC study in advancing the data center bill next year, and how would you advise that we engage with JLARC? I don't think we really can be involved with JLARC, but what's the role later on? And someone also brought up sewer, which I would think they need to change the name to Kerr or something.
Yeah,
something
well,
a little. But that's the commission that, for those that don't know, Senator Serval sort of stood up again, kind of revitalized for the utility regulation and having a little more time to look at things more thoughtfully.
Well, I'll start with CEUR, which stands for Commission on Electric Utility Regulation. I'm trying to break my habit of calling it sewer. I agree. And yes, I'm very hopeful. Scott, of course, is hopeful that it will grow. It sort of died on the vine, that it will grow into a much more active and productive place. I'm on it, and really have high hopes for it. And it is a place, I think, that we'll be able to have input into a lot of these issues. The JLARC. They may do public hearings. I don't know, but there's really not a way to lobby JLARC. Alfonso, they will occasionally hold a public hearing where people might be able to show up. I don't really know, to tell you the truth.
No, the JLARC commission will have hearings where they
Yeah,
meet.
right.
So that might be the best opportunity, but I don't believe it's sort of like the Congressional Budget Office and GAO all sort of rolled up into one. Is what they, and also the Congressional Research Service, all rolled up in one organization for the House and Senate.
Great. And then Chris Luminestrella, you have your hand up.
Sure, thank you. And can you comment? Let me know if you've already talked about it and I missed it. But if not, can you comment on the modular nuclear reactors bill that, in my understanding, just passed? Does that mean that we're going to go forward with this, or is there any way next year to somehow backtrack on that?
So Chris, the answer is yes. Both Dominion and APCO are going to go forward. I'm not of the view that this bill is the cause of them going forward. They're going to go forward whether this bill passed or not. And that was one of the points I kept trying to argue with my colleagues, that the notion that Dominion can't start the process of looking at SMRs without this bill is silly. They can and will and want to pursue SMR technology, regardless of what the General Assembly did or didn't do with those bills. The SMR bills were maybe my biggest disappointment of the session, that we weren't able to block those. There were the Dominion bill came to the floor, as only Dominion can do, very late in the game, literally on the second to last day of session. And there was some fairly heated debate about it. The bill, the opponents of the bill, including me, were not making the argument that Dominion won't do this if we don't pass these bills, because, as I said, I think Dominion is going to do this. And I see Meredith saying, yes, Delaware was terrific on 454. I'd been telling people that one of the things that sticks in my craw about the SMR bills is the governor refuses to sort of come clean with Virginians about what these things are going to cost. And from the same guy who bangs on Reggie and decides to take us out of Reggie, calling the $2 that appeared on people's electric bills for Reggie as a hidden tax on Virginians, refuses to acknowledge that what we're about to get, at least in his view of the world, is a tax on all Virginians, so that Dominion and APCO can finance their SMR technology in advance on our nickel rather than theirs.
Let's think about what we could do with this money if it was actually set aside for solar and wind.
Oh yeah. Imagine. So it was a frustrating outcome. But defeating those bills, defeating those bills would not have stopped SMRs in Virginia. These two utilities are of the view that they either will need SMRs or ought to at least look at whether they'll need SMRs, and would have done it whether these two bills passed or not.
Despite the fact that the technology is not there yet.
Of course not. Even the governor acknowledges that
the one place that actually was close, their project was taken offline back in the fall. The original
we'll be on our third post-Youngkin governor by the time any of these SMRs come online, if they ever do.
The original Marshall bill that was the cognate of the Marsden bill had language in it that under the rack that they were using, the CEO and the corporation, if the project never got done, could claw back all the money that they invested in it, right on the backs of the ratepayers. Even with all of they wanted over 20 of these to be built around the state initially. But then they also said in the planning and, most importantly, licensing, that they would get around $110 million overall. But when you looked at what Idaho had, it was $1.52 billion that they were going to get repaid under their plan for the planning. That's how much it cost. And so if one of these is going to be, similar size, similar builds, if there was 1.5 or so billion, and they're saying, oh, it's only going to be 110 million. That's a problem, and that's a North Anna 3 type problem. Everybody remembers North Anna 3 is the nuclear site we're still paying for. That's never ever going to get built, but the ratepayers are still paying for it because of how the bill was passed and the protections that Dominion gave itself. So serious problems with these bills. I'm very good friends with Israel O'Quinn and Dave Marsden, but to say that we had words about these pieces of legislation would be an understatement.
I think that pretty much covers the main, and we have a lot of commentary in the chat and a lot of concerns, and even suggestions like maybe the data centers could pay for the SMR development. But I think there's no other straight out questions at this point. So I think we may want to wrap up.
Yeah, speak now, forever hold your peace. If you have one last question. Well, if not, I just want to thank you, Rip and Alfonso, for your time, for your endless enthusiasm, for your endless upbeatness, which is really helpful for us. And thank you so much for joining us.
Wonderful to be with you all. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everybody.
Don't give up. Never ever give up.
No, exactly.
Thank you very
right.
much.
And
Don't
keep up
ever
the
give
great
up.
work. Keep up the great work. Thank you.
Stakes are too high. We all know that. Good night now.
Yeah, thank you.